Billionaire's fake marriage was just an act until her one rule made it real. He built a fake marriage to save his empire, but when her only rule was, don't fall in love, it became the one thing he couldn't keep. Hello everyone, subscribe now to keep these stories of love loss and redemption alive. Comment on your city so we can feel how far our hearts travel. Every click helps another soul believe in love again. Now let's continue with the story. The morning sky over Seattle was a soft gray watercolor, the kind that promised rain but not yet. Inside the glass tower of Vail Media Group, Ethan Vail stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, his reflection blending with the skyline. He looked every bit the legend they called him, America's youngest billionaire, in broadcasting sharp, calm, untouchable. But the headlines flashing on his phone told a different story. Vail Media under investigation for manipulated ratings. Ethan Vail's empire at risk. He exhaled slowly, the kind of sigh that came from years of holding everything together. He'd lost faith in love long ago, ever since his ex-fiancée walked out an hour before their wedding, selling her story to the tabloids for millions. Since that day, Ethan had promised himself one thing: never let emotions mix with business again. "Ethan, we need to act fast," his publicist Nora said, bursting into the office with a stack of papers. "Investors are panicking. You need someone to shift the narrative." He barely looked up. "I already gave them a statement." "Not enough." Nora lowered her voice. "People don't trust statements. They trust stories." He turned, finally meeting her eyes. "What kind of story?" "The kind that looks real," she said carefully. "A marriage. A perfect normal love story the media can't resist." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You're asking me to fake a marriage for public sympathy?" Nora shrugged. "You'd be surprised how much America loves redemption." Across town, Harper Quinn stared at a stack of unpaid medical bills on the kitchen table of her tiny apartment. Her younger brother's treatment in Spokane was more than she could ever afford on her freelance screenwriter salary. Her phone buzzed with a new email: casting call seeking woman for media partnership project. Discretion required. 6 figures. Harper frowned. Too good to be true. Still, something about it made her click apply. That evening, Ethan scanned her file. No scandals, no tabloid past, just a woman who wrote quietly about people who tried, failed, and tried again. "She's honest," Nora said, "and no one would suspect a deal." Ethan leaned back, expression unreadable. "Fine," he said at last, "but there'll be rules." And somewhere across Seattle, Harper whispered the same to herself, not knowing their lives were already written into the same story. Her one rule would change everything: don't let it become real. The lobby of Vail Media shimmered with morning light bouncing off marble floors. Reporters hurried past and assistants carried coffee trays like soldiers on a mission. Harper stood near the reception desk, clutching her visitor badge, feeling both underdressed and overwhelmed. She'd been told this was a script meeting, but no one mentioned the script was her life. When the elevator doors opened, Ethan Vail stepped out, tall, tailored, and every bit as controlled as the headlines made him. His presence filled the space before he even spoke. "Miss Quinn," he said, his tone polite but cool. She nodded quickly, then turned too fast, her elbow hitting the cup in her hand. Coffee splashed across his perfectly pressed shirt. The entire lobby froze. Harper gasped, "Oh my, I'm so sorry." Ethan looked down at his shirt, then at her, his jaw tightening for half a second before the faintest smile curved his lips. "It's fine," he said evenly, "though I can't say it's my usual choice of cologne." A few people nearby laughed softly. Someone took a photo. Within hours, that photo would circle social media. Ethan Vail finally smiles because of her. Later that afternoon, Harper sat in a quiet conference room across from Ethan and his PR team. They explained the arrangement: a public marriage to repair his image, 1 year only strictly business. She listened carefully, heart pounding against logic. "Why me?" she asked. Ethan studied her for a long moment. "Because you don't seem impressed," he said. "Everyone else wants something from me. You just spilled coffee." Harper almost laughed. "That's my superpower then." "Apparently," he said dryly. "You'll be compensated well. But there'll be rules." She hesitated, then said softly, "I have one too." He raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" She looked straight at him. "No feelings. No pretending it's real outside the cameras." Ethan nodded once. "Deal." They shook hands. The deal sealed the story about to begin, and neither realizing that her single rule would be the one thing he could never keep. The morning rain tapped softly against the tall windows of Ethan's penthouse, a sleek world of glass and silence overlooking Puget Sound. Harper stood near the marble counter, reading the printed schedule his assistant had left for her. 8:00 a.m. Public breakfast interview, 1:00 p.m. Charity board photo session, 6:00 p.m. Dinner with investors. Every line looked perfectly arranged, every minute controlled. "Do I really need to smile at breakfast?" she asked, her tone half-teasing. Ethan looked up from his laptop, his expression unreadable. "Yes, the network bought the segment. They expect a happy couple." Harper raised a brow. "Guess they'll have to settle for realistic." Ethan glanced at her. "Realistic doesn't trend, Miss Quinn." She folded the paper, walking toward the window. "Neither does fake forever." He didn't answer. Outside, the clouds hung low, a mirror of the tension between them. The breakfast interview was filmed in a cozy downtown cafe decorated with hanging plants and vintage lights. Ethan arrived in his tailored navy suit. Harper wore a soft cream sweater and a smile that wasn't rehearsed because she refused to practice one. The reporter leaned in. "So, Mr. Vale, what's the secret behind your whirlwind romance?" Ethan opened his mouth, but Harper beat him to it. "Coffee," she said lightly. "He spilled his heart right after I spilled mine." Laughter rippled through the crew. Ethan blinked, caught off guard, but the warmth in her tone disarmed him. The interview went viral within hours. Dash Coffee Love topped the trends. People called it the only love story worth watching this fall. Nora, his publicist, nearly danced with relief. But Ethan didn't celebrate. He just stared at the screen at Harper's easy smile beside him and wondered why it felt too real. Days turned into weeks. Their public appearances became routine, hand in hand, practiced glances, press photos that looked perfect. But behind closed doors, the lines blurred dangerously. Harper left books scattered on the couch, laughed too loud at midnight movies, and sang softly while writing scripts in the kitchen. Her presence filled the quiet spaces Ethan never realized he had. Still, his habits remained. He planned her wardrobe, approved her talking points, and insisted every move fit the Vale brand. One night she finally snapped. "You can control the cameras," she said, "but not me." Ethan's jaw tightened. "This isn't personal, Harper. It's business." She took a step closer. "Then why do you care what color I wear to bed when no one's watching?" His silence was louder than any answer. Later, as she stood on the balcony, the Seattle wind cool against her skin, Harper whispered to herself, "He doesn't even know he's breaking his own rule." Inside, Ethan watched her reflection in the glass door, the woman who'd turned his strategy into chaos. For the first time, he realized something dangerous. He liked the chaos. He poured himself a glass of bourbon, but the taste felt hollow. He looked again at her silhouette framed by city lights and thought, maybe control isn't what I need. By morning, new photos of them smiling together covered every magazine. America saw a love story, Ethan saw a storm coming, and Harper, she began to see the truth behind the act. No one could play a role forever, especially not when the heart had already forgotten the script. The city had settled into autumn. Leaves drifted down the quiet streets, and the air smelled faintly of rain and roasted coffee. Harper loved this time of year, the in-between season, not summer, not winter, just soft gray mornings and orange afternoons. For the first time, Ethan started noticing those details too. He'd never slowed down long enough to. That Thursday, a storm rolled in earlier than expected. Thunder rumbled over the skyline as lightning flashed across the bay. The power flickered once, then the penthouse went completely dark. Harper stood in the kitchen, her phone flashlight casting a small circle of light. "Well," she said with a grin, "guess even billionaires lose power sometimes." Ethan appeared from the hallway carrying a candle he'd found in a drawer. "I didn't realize we even owned one." "Don't look so alarmed," she teased. "It's just dinner by candlelight, very romantic, Mr. Vale." He gave a dry smile. "Only if we can order takeout." "Nope," she said, grabbing a frozen pizza from the fridge. "You're cooking tonight." Ethan blinked. "I run a company, Harper. I don't cook." She handed him the pizza cutter. "Then consider this a merger." An hour later, they sat on the living room floor eating slightly burnt pizza from paper plates, laughing every time thunder interrupted them. For once, no cameras, no curated smiles, just two people sharing warmth in the dark. Harper told him about her brother, about nights spent writing scripts at a small diner near the hospital. Ethan listened quietly, his usual guarded tone gone. When she finished, he said softly, "You write about love like you still believe in it." She shrugged, looking at the candle flame. "I write about people trying to believe again." That's close enough. Something shifted in his chest, a feeling unfamiliar yet steady. He wanted to tell her he used to believe too before his life became contracts and headlines, but instead he asked, "What's that song you were humming earlier?" Harper smiled faintly. "It's one I wrote years ago. It's called Make It Real." He leaned back, eyes fixed on her. "Sing it again." Her voice was soft, barely louder than the storm outside. Each word filled the space between them with something honest, something neither could label. When the song ended, Ethan whispered, "I haven't felt this quiet in years." Harper looked at him, really looked, and for the first time she didn't see the billionaire from the tabloids. She saw a man trying to remember what it meant to be human. The lights blinked back on suddenly, but neither moved right away. The spell lingered like the warmth after rain. Later, as Ethan walked to his room, he glanced back once more. Harper sat at the piano, her fingers tracing the keys, the candle still burning beside her. Something about that image stayed with him, simple, unguarded, real. He didn't know why, but from that night on, every morning before sunrise, he made 2 cups of coffee instead of 1. One for him, one waiting for her. The first snow arrived early that year. Soft flakes brushed against the windows of the Vale penthouse like whispers from a quieter world. Harper sat by the piano working on a new script, the melody of Make It Real playing faintly in the background. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago. The last few weeks had been peaceful, too peaceful for a relationship that wasn't supposed to be real. Ethan had changed. He smiled more, listened more, and sometimes left small notes on her desk with things like, "You forgot breakfast again," or "Scene 5 made me laugh." Harper told herself it was all for show, just good PR, but her heart refused to believe it. That afternoon, Nora called an emergency meeting. The company's press inbox was flooded with questions about an online post gone viral. Someone had leaked screenshots from 2 years ago, an article Harper once wrote anonymously criticizing Vale Media for selling illusions instead of truth. Harper froze as the images appeared on the big screen. The words were hers, written during her lowest year when she couldn't afford rent and believed powerful people never cared who got hurt on their way up. The room fell silent. Then Ethan spoke, quiet, controlled, but cutting. "So this is who I married." Her chest tightened. "I didn't mean." He raised a hand. "Save it. You lied, Harper. You built your brand on truth and then walked straight into mine with a lie." Tears burned behind her eyes. "I wasn't lying about this," she said softly. "Not anymore." Ethan turned away, staring out at the snow-covered city. "You think feelings fix everything? You think honesty erases the past?" She took a trembling breath. "I think honesty starts it." But there was something he didn't tell her, a truth buried under his own guilt. 2 years ago, when that same article had started gaining traction, Ethan had quietly bought the blog that published it, shut it down, and blacklisted the anonymous writer from every major media job in Seattle. Now that writer stood before him, the woman who'd spilled coffee sang in the dark, and made him remember what warmth felt like. For the first time, he felt ashamed of his own power. By nightfall, the story hit national news. Headlines called Harper a fraud, accusing her of staging the marriage for attention. Paparazzi waited outside the building, flashes lighting up the snow like fireworks. Ethan poured himself a drink, the amber liquid trembling in his hand. When Harper walked in, her face pale but steady, he didn't look up. "I should have known better," he said quietly. "This was never real." She swallowed hard. "Maybe it wasn't, but it became real for me." He turned finally, eyes cold and tired. "Then, that's your mistake." Her voice cracked. "You're doing it again, pretending control is strength." He didn't answer, and in the silence, something between them broke for good. Harper slipped the wedding ring off her finger, set it on the counter beside his untouched drink, and whispered, "Maybe love was never the problem. Maybe fear was." Then she walked away. The next morning, the penthouse felt heavier than ever. The second cup of coffee sat untouched on the table, steam fading slowly into the cold air. Outside, the snow kept falling quiet, endless, covering everything that once felt alive. And for the first time in years, Ethan Vale, the man who controlled every headline, had no script, no plan, and no idea how to fix the one story that truly mattered. The headlines faded as fast as they came. New scandals replaced old ones, and Vale Media moved on like nothing had ever happened. But Ethan Vale didn't. He still came to the office, still wore the same dark suits, still signed documents without reading them twice. Yet something in him had gone still, like the city after a storm, when everything looks the same, but nothing feels right. The penthouse felt enormous without her. The piano sat untouched, its cover gathering dust. He hadn't played her song again, not once. Every morning he made 2 cups of coffee out of habit, one black one with a splash of oat milk, and poured the second down the sink. Nora stopped by one evening to check on him. "You should make a statement," she said gently. "People are wondering what happened." Ethan shook his head. "Let them wonder." She hesitated, then added, "She didn't take the payout, Ethan. The one we agreed to if the contract ended early. She left everything." He looked up, eyes shadowed. "She always did." Nora sighed, then quietly placed something on the counter, a USB drive. "She sent this before she left. Said you'd know what to do with it." When she left, the silence returned. Ethan stared at the small silver device for a long time before finally plugging it into his laptop. The file was simple, a video titled "For E." Harper's voice filled the room, soft and steady, recorded somewhere near the ocean. "You once told me that stories are just products, that feelings get in the way of business. Maybe you were right. But I think sometimes the right story changes everything, even the person who wrote it." He froze as she turned the camera. Behind her, waves crashed against dark rocks, and the sun dipped below the horizon. "If you ever decide to make something real, you'll know where to find me." The video ended there. Nothing more, just her voice and the sound of the sea. A week later, Ethan drove south along the coast highway, mile after mile of gray water and pine forests. No press, no schedule, no cameras, only the steady rhythm of his heart matching the rain on the windshield. He stopped at a small town near Cannon Beach, Oregon, where locals recognized him but pretended not to. In a quiet cafe overlooking the water, he found a newspaper left on the counter. "Local writer starts free screenwriting workshop for kids." The photo beneath the headline showed Harper smiling, a group of children gathered around her. He didn't go inside that day. He just stood outside in the drizzle watching through the window as she helped a young boy learn to write his first story. For a long moment, he simply breathed. That night back at the small inn where he stayed, Ethan sat by the window with the USB beside him and finally played Make It Real on his phone. The melody filled the quiet room, and something inside him broke open, not with pain, but with understanding. Love wasn't about control or image or saving a company. It was about showing up, and this time he would. The next morning he packed his bag, looked out at the gray waves, and whispered to himself, "Time to make it real." The winter air along the Oregon coast was crisp and clean, the kind that made every breath feel earned. The ocean rolled steady and gray, a quiet pulse against the endless horizon. Harper stood outside the community theater, tugging her coat tighter as volunteers carried equipment inside. Tonight was the premiere of her first short film, The Act That Became Real, a story about a man who faked love and learned it was the only truth left. She had no idea how much the world would see of her in that script. Inside, the small auditorium smelled of sea salt and popcorn. Families, students, and locals filled the seats. No red carpet, no photographers, just people who came because they cared. For Harper, that was enough. When the lights dimmed, the screen flickered to life waves, crashing voices narrating faces she had coached and edited for weeks. But halfway through the film, a new clip appeared, one she hadn't included. Harper froze. The crowd murmured softly. On screen, Ethan Vale stood in front of a piano in a dimly lit studio. He looked straight at the camera. "This isn't a trailer," he began quietly. "It's a confession." Gasps echoed in the theater. Harper's heart pounded in her chest. "I once said stories were just business," he continued. "But the truth is, the right story makes you want to change." The video cut to scenes from behind the cameras, small, unscripted moments, Harper laughing mid-take, Ethan watching her when she wasn't looking, the two of them walking in silence through rain. "You told me to never act with my heart," his voice said softly. "So this time I won't act at all." The audience clapped softly, not sure if this was part of the movie or something else entirely. Harper sat frozen in the front row, eyes shining, hands trembling. Then from the back of the room, a familiar voice spoke. "Sorry for hijacking your premiere." She turned. Ethan stood in the aisle, no bodyguards, no cameras, just him. People turned to watch as he walked forward, each step steady, like he'd been waiting his whole life to get this scene right. He stopped in front of her, close enough for her to see the apology written in his eyes. "Harper Quinn," he said quietly, "you once wrote that love is the most dangerous act of all. You were right, but I'm not afraid of the risk anymore." Harper swallowed hard, trying to steady her voice. "You can't just walk in here and rewrite the ending." He smiled faintly. "I'm not rewriting it. I'm asking to be in the sequel." A ripple of laughter and warmth spread through the crowd. For a moment, it felt like the whole room was holding its breath with her. Harper stepped closer, her tone soft but sure. "This isn't about the cameras anymore, Ethan." He nodded. It never was. He held out his hand, not as a billionaire, not as a man trying to fix an image, but simply as someone asking for another chance. She looked at it for a heartbeat, then took it. The theater erupted in applause, but the world around them blurred. It wasn't about the audience. It was about the two of them, the story that had begun as fiction and somehow turned real. Later that night, as the crowd drifted away, Harper stood by the ocean outside the theater. The tide came in soft and slow moonlight rippling across the waves. Ethan walked up beside her, hands in his coat pockets. "I bought the rights to the film," he said quietly. "I want the world to see it, the real version." She smiled through the wind. "You're still producing my story." He looked at her eyes, warm. "No, I'm just lucky enough to live in it." The ocean wind swept through the empty boardwalk, carrying the smell of salt and rain. The theater lights behind them dimmed, leaving only the sound of waves and faint laughter fading into the night. Harper stood barefoot on the sandhills in hand, her hair tousled by the wind. The moonlight cast a soft glow across her face, the kind of light that made truth impossible to hide. Ethan followed her down the beach, the cold sand crunching beneath his shoes. He stopped a few feet away, hesitating like a man afraid to break something fragile. "You didn't have to come tonight," she said quietly, eyes still on the water. He smiled faintly. "I didn't plan to. I was halfway back to Seattle before I realized leaving wasn't helping." She turned to him, arms crossed loosely, a mix of disbelief and something gentler. "So what changed?" Ethan exhaled, his breath visible in the cold air. "You once told me real stories change people. Turns out mine changed me first." For a long moment, neither spoke. The tide rolled, closer waves brushing against their feet. Harper looked down at the water, then back at him. "This doesn't erase everything, Ethan. You can't just fix it with one speech." "I know," he said softly. "I didn't come here to fix it. I came to tell the truth finally." He took a step closer, his voice low and steady. "I bought the blog that shut you out 2 years ago. I told myself it was business. But the truth is, I was scared someone might see me the way you did, as a man pretending to be good." Harper's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. "You could have told me." "I should have," he admitted. "But I didn't know how to be honest without losing everything I'd built." She gave a faint, sad smile. "Then maybe what you built wasn't the right thing." Ethan nodded slowly. "Maybe not. But if you let me, I'd like to build something better, something real with you." The wind picked up, lifting her hair as she studied him. The same man who once treated love like a contract, now standing barefoot in the cold. No script, no cameras, no control. "Then promise me," she said softly. "No more acting. No more pretending for the world." He stepped closer, the waves brushing his ankles. "Only reality," he whispered. "If you'll stay." She stared at him for a heartbeat, then reached out, placing her hand on his chest. His heart beat hard beneath her palm, steady, real, unedited. The sound of the surf drowned everything else as she rose on her toes and kissed him, not the way tabloids showed it, but slow, trembling, like two people finally exhaling the same breath. Behind them, the theater projector still played on the white screen outside, a silent image of their first on-camera kiss months ago. Two versions of the same scene, one staged, one real, merging in the reflection of the ocean. When they finally broke apart, Harper laughed softly, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Guess we just ruined your PR campaign." Ethan smiled, brushing a thumb across her face. "Best investment I ever made." She looked up at him, eyes bright, voice barely a whisper. "Then let's make it real." He took her hand, fingers intertwining with hers as the waves crashed around them, and for the first time in either of their lives, there was no audience to please, no deal to protect. No script to follow, only truth, and the quiet certainty that love once found didn't need pretending anymore. Morning sunlight spilled softly through the wide windows of a small cedar cabin overlooking the ocean. The place was quiet except for the sound of waves and the faint hiss of the coffee maker. Ethan Vale, the man who once ran a billion-dollar empire, stood barefoot in a plain white t-shirt, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. He had traded boardrooms for Beach's headlines for silence, and found that peace was louder than applause. At the dining table, Harper sat cross-legged, laptop open, a pencil tucked behind her ear. She was working on a new script, one about love that didn't begin with perfection, but with forgiveness. When Ethan set a mug beside her, she looked up, smiling. "You still make it the same way," she said. He grinned. "Some things shouldn't change." On the wall behind her, a framed poster read, "The Act That Became Real," streaming worldwide. Her little film, the one they made with no budget, no PR, just honesty, had become a quiet success. People didn't just watch it, they felt it. Harper reached across the table, brushing her fingers against his wrist. "I still can't believe you let the world see us like that." Ethan took a sip of coffee, eyes warm. "I didn't show them us. I showed them what real looks like." She laughed softly. "You mean messy, unpredictable, and fueled by caffeine." "Exactly," he said, smiling. After breakfast, they walked down the beach, their footprints trailing behind them. The sea breeze was cold, but gentle, the kind of cold that felt alive. Ethan stopped halfway, pulling something from his jacket pocket, a folded piece of paper slightly crumpled. "What's that?" Harper asked. He handed it to her. It was a simple document typed unsigned, a mock contract titled Partnership Agreement, Forever. Harper raised an eyebrow. "Another deal, Mr. Vale." He chuckled. "Old habits die hard, but this one only has one clause." She unfolded the page. In the center in his handwriting were two words, "Stay real." Her throat tightened as she looked up at him. "Is this your version of a proposal?" He smiled softly. "It's my version of a promise." The wind blew between them, tugging at her hair, and for a moment, the world felt perfectly still. Harper took his pen, signed the bottom of the paper, and whispered, "Deal." Ethan leaned forward, kissing her forehead gently. The ocean roared behind them, a sound that no longer felt lonely, but endless, like a life finally beginning. In that small coastal town, two people who once faked a marriage were finally living one worth believing in. A full year had passed since Harper Quinn and Ethan Vale had traded skyscrapers for sea air. The world had changed quietly around them. New headlines, new faces, new billionaires chasing the same illusion Ethan once did. But inside their small coastal cabin, time moved slower, like the tide that never rushed to reach the shore. The morning mist drifted in through the open window, wrapping the room in a cool hush. Ethan sat at the desk near the window, typing the final sentence of his memoir, "Love isn't an act. It's the only truth worth performing." He read the words again, then smiled to himself because for once they weren't just words. Across the room, Harper filmed the last scene of her new series, a small camera perched on a tripod. It was about two writers who fall in love while pretending to co-author a story. Art imitating life, or maybe life finally admitting it was art. When she turned off the camera, Ethan looked up. "You done rewriting us again?" She smirked, just improving the dialogue. He stood walking over to her, wrapping his arms gently around her shoulders. "You always were the better writer. And you," she said, "were always better at happy endings." They stayed like that for a long moment. No words, just the steady sound of the ocean outside, waves folding into each other, like breaths shared. Later that evening, they walked down to the water's edge. The sky burned in streaks of pink and gold, the kind of sunset that made people believe in something bigger than themselves. Ethan skipped a small stone across the surf, watching it disappear beneath the reflection of the sun. "Funny," he said quietly. "I spent half my life building stories that weren't real, and then spent the rest learning how to live one that was." Harper squeezed his hand, her voice barely above the sound of the tide. Maybe that's what love is, not a performance, not a perfect script, just two people brave enough to stop pretending. He looked at her eyes full of peace. "Then we finally did it right." The waves came in stronger now, washing over their feet as if the ocean itself wanted to write the ending. They stood there side by side, the sea wind in their hair, the day giving way to dusk. Somewhere behind them, their film, The Act That Became Real, continued to find new viewers. People who saw a bit of themselves in a love story that began as a lie and turned into something unforgettable. And maybe that was the point, because love, like the ocean, never needed to prove it was real. It just needed to keep coming back. Narrator's voice. Sometimes the line between acting and loving blurs until you realize the realest thing you ever did was pretend. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and join us for more stories that remind you love is still the most beautiful truth of all. Love Story, Billionaire Love, Emotional Healing.